They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes family ties can feel more like chains. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but here I am. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and last Thanksgiving, my own children, the very ones I raised, with every ounce of love in my body, relegated me to eating my holiday meal alone in the kitchen while they laughed and celebrated in the dining room of the home I built. The home that, on paper, still belonged to me. But that was their first mistake, assuming papers don't matter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been the kind of mother who would move mountains for her children. When my husband Thomas died 15 years ago, I was left alone with our 3 children, Rebecca, Jason, and Emma, and a modest life insurance policy. Thomas had been a high school principal, beloved by the community but certainly not wealthy. I was a part-time librarian who'd stepped back from my career to raise our family. His death left me with 3 grieving children, a mortgage, and uncertainty hanging over our heads like a storm cloud. But I did what mothers do. I adapted. I took the insurance money and, instead of just paying bills, I enrolled in night classes for accounting. During days, I worked double shifts at the library and waitressed on weekends. For 3 years, I barely slept. My hands cracked from cleaning solutions. My feet ached from standing, but I never complained. Not when I missed Rebecca's soccer games. Not when I couldn't attend Jason's debate tournaments. Not when Emma would look at me with those sad eyes, asking why I was never home. It's temporary, I'd tell them. We're building something better. And we did. With my new accounting certification, I landed a job at Brewster Financial. I started as an assistant accountant, but within 5 years, I'd worked my way up to senior financial advisor. My specialty? Helping widows and divorcees rebuild their financial lives. My clients called me the Phoenix Lady because I helped them rise from the ashes of financial ruin. By the time Rebecca entered college, we had moved from our small 3-bedroom house to a beautiful colonial-style home in Mapleton Heights. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a garden that became my sanctuary. I paid for Rebecca's college tuition without loans, then Jason's, then Emma's. I never remarried, focusing instead on giving my children the opportunities Thomas would have wanted for them. "Mom's got it covered," became their mantra, and I was proud to cover it all. Rebecca became a corporate attorney, Jason a surgeon, and Emma followed her father's footsteps into education as a school administrator. I beamed with pride at each graduation, each career milestone. My sacrifices had been worth it. My children were successful, established, exactly what I'd worked for. But something shifted when they entered their 30s. The calls became less frequent. When we did speak, they seemed distracted, rushed. They'd ask about my health with clinical detachment, as if running through a checklist rather than genuinely caring. "Mom, at your age, you should think about downsizing," Rebecca said during one of our rare lunch dates, picking at her salad. "The property taxes on that house are ridiculous," Jason added on a separate occasion. "It doesn't make financial sense for you to keep it." "You rattle around in that big place all alone," Emma would say, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Wouldn't you be happier somewhere cozier?" I brushed off their suggestions. The house was fully paid for. My retirement account was healthy. I'd made sound investments. My financial security was not their concern. Besides, that house held memories of Thomas, of the children growing up, of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings. It wasn't just a property. It was the physical embodiment of our family history. Then last October, Rebecca called with what seemed like wonderful news. "Mom, we're all coming home for Thanksgiving this year. The whole family, spouses, kids, everyone. We'll do it at your house, of course. The traditional Mitchell family Thanksgiving." My heart soared. It had been 3 years since we'd all been together for a holiday. I spent the next few weeks preparing. I had the house professionally cleaned, the guest rooms readied, the yard landscaped despite the autumn chill. I ordered a heritage turkey from a local farm, bought new china for the occasion, and planned a menu that included everyone's favorites: Jason's preferred bourbon sweet potatoes, Emma's beloved cranberry orange relish, Rebecca's favorite pecan pie. They arrived the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Rebecca with her husband Glenn and their twins, Jason with his wife Veronica and their son, and Emma with her partner Alexis. The house filled with noise and activity. I was ecstatic, moving from room to room, making sure everyone was comfortable, that the grandchildren had their favorite snacks, that the thermostats were set to everyone's liking. That first evening, as I prepared dinner, Rebecca stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind her. "Mom, we need to talk about something important." Her tone made me pause. I turned from the stove, wiping my hands on my apron. "What is it, honey?" "We've been concerned about you living here alone. This place is so big, and the stairs. At your age, it's a fall risk." I forced a laugh. "I'm 63, not 90, and I'm in excellent health. My doctor just gave me a clean bill." "It's not just the health concerns," she interrupted. "It's financial responsibility. This house is an asset that's sitting stagnant. You could sell it, invest the proceeds, and live very comfortably in a nice retirement community." "I am living comfortably," I said firmly, "and I have no intention of selling my home." The kitchen door swung open and Jason entered, followed by Emma. They formed a half circle around me, and suddenly I felt cornered against my own kitchen counter. "Mom," Jason began, his voice taking on that doctorly tone he used with difficult patience. "We've actually been looking into some options for you. There's a wonderful assisted living community called Sunset Gardens about 20 minutes from here." "Assisted living?" I stared at him in disbelief. "I don't need assistance to live. I'm fully independent." Emma stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. "It's not just about need, Mom. It's about community. You're alone here. At Sunset Gardens, you'd have friends your own age, activities, people looking out for you." "I have friends," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I have my book club, my gardening circle, my volunteer work at the literacy center. My life is full." Rebecca sighed, exchanging glances with her siblings. "We knew you'd be resistant. But really, Mom, it's the sensible thing to do. This house is too valuable to just sit in." A chill ran down my spine as their true motivation became clear. "This isn't about my well-being at all, is it? This is about your inheritance." Jason had the decency to look slightly abashed, but Rebecca met my gaze head-on. "It's about making practical decisions. This property is the largest asset in your estate. Liquidating it now means you can enjoy the proceeds during your lifetime. And yes, eventually, there would be something to pass on to us and your grandchildren." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I see." My voice had gone quiet. "And have you already picked out my burial plot as well? Or shall I handle that detail myself?" "Mom, don't be dramatic," Emma said with an eye roll. "We're trying to help you." "This conversation is over," I said, turning back to the stove. "I'm not selling my home, and I'm not moving to Sunset Gardens or anywhere else. Now, unless you want dinner to burn, I suggest you all go back to the living room." They left, but the atmosphere had changed. Their faces held expressions I'd never seen directed at me before: disappointment, frustration, even calculation. These weren't the faces of my children. They were the faces of people eyeing a prize that was being withheld from them. The next day, the true campaign began. They brought brochures from Sunset Gardens, left them strategically around the house. They made comments about the difficulty of maintaining such a large property, asked pointed questions about my retirement savings, and mentioned friends' parents who had made the smart choice by downsizing. I held firm, but by Thanksgiving morning, the tension was palpable. I rose at dawn to begin cooking, taking comfort in the familiar routine of preparing the feast. By noon, the turkey was roasting, filling the house with its savory aroma. The pies were cooling on the rack. Rebecca's twins were playing in the backyard under Glenn's supervision. Everything seemed peaceful, if strained. Then I overheard a conversation from the living room, where my children had gathered with their spouses. "She's being completely unreasonable," Rebecca was saying. "At her age, she shouldn't be making these kinds of financial decisions alone." "We could look into power of attorney," Jason suggested. "Given her age and her stubbornness, we might have grounds." "On what basis?" Emma asked. "She's completely lucid. There's no diagnosis we could leverage." "There's that financial advisor she trusts so much, Martin," Rebecca said. "Maybe he could talk some sense into her, make her see this is for her own good." I stood frozen in the hallway, the bowl of whipped cream for the pies clutched in my hands. Power of attorney? Leveraging a diagnosis? These were my children, plotting to take control of my life, my home, my finances, all under the guise of concern. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down the bowl. I'd raised them better than this. I'd worked myself to the bone to provide for them, to give them opportunities, security, education. And now they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. At 3:00, I called everyone to dinner. The dining room table was set beautifully, my best china, crystal glasses, the silver candlesticks that had been Thomas's grandmother's. The turkey was golden brown, the sides arranged in serving dishes, everything perfect. As they gathered, Rebecca took the seat at the head of the table, my seat, where I'd sat for every family dinner since Thomas died. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "that's my place." She looked up, surprised. "Oh, I just thought since you'd be up and down serving, you might prefer somewhere with easier access to the kitchen." "I always sit there," I insisted. An awkward silence fell over the table. Jason cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe just for today with all of us here, it makes sense for you to sit." "Where exactly?" I asked, looking at the table. There were places set for everyone. My children, their spouses, even the oldest grandchildren, but not for me. Emma had the grace to look embarrassed. "Oh, we thought you'd prefer to eat after everyone's served. You know, so you can make sure everything's perfect. You're always so particular about the meal." I stood there, holding the gravy boat, as the realization washed over me. They hadn't forgotten to set a place for me. They'd deliberately excluded me from my own Thanksgiving table. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the pain slicing through my chest. "And where exactly am I supposed to eat? In the pantry? Perhaps standing over the sink?" Rebecca sighed dramatically. "Mom, there's no need to make a scene. We just thought you'd be more comfortable in the kitchen. You can keep an eye on everything from there." I looked around the table at these strangers wearing my children's faces, at my son-in-law Glenn, who couldn't meet my eyes, at Veronica, who was already serving herself mashed potatoes as if nothing unusual was happening, at the grandchildren, watching with wide, confused eyes. "Very well," I said finally. "Enjoy your meal." I returned to the kitchen, set the gravy boat on the counter, and sank into a chair at the small breakfast table. I could hear them in the dining room, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, Rebecca's laugh. They were celebrating Thanksgiving without a second thought for the woman who had made it all possible. The woman whose home they sat in. The woman who had sacrificed everything for them. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold resolve settled over me. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to a number I rarely contacted. "Edward, it's Eleanor Mitchell. I need to see you tomorrow. It's urgent." The reply came almost immediately. "My office, 9 a.m. Is everything all right?" "Not yet," I typed back. "But it will be." I put my phone away and surveyed my kitchen, the dirty pots and pans, the mess they expected me to clean while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. I'd raised these children. I'd loved them unconditionally. I'd given them everything. And this was how they repaid me, exiling me to the kitchen during Thanksgiving dinner in my own home, plotting to strip me of my autonomy, eyeing my assets like vultures. Tomorrow, I would see Edward Hargrove, my late husband's best friend and one of the most respected estate attorneys in the state. And I would make absolutely sure that my children understood the true meaning of gratitude and consequences. The meantime, I fixed myself a plate, opened a bottle of the expensive Cabernet I'd been saving, and enjoyed my solitary meal in the kitchen. Let them scheme. Let them assume I was broken. They had no idea what was coming. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But first, I would let them finish their hot meal, blissfully unaware that this would be their last Thanksgiving in my home. Let them enjoy themselves. After all, it's what Thomas would have wanted. One final happy memory before the hammer fell. Because tomorrow, everything would change. With one phone call to my lawyer, I would remind my children of a simple truth they seemed to have forgotten. I wasn't just their mother. I was Eleanor Mitchell, the woman who had risen from tragedy once before. And I would do it again. I took a sip of wine and smiled to myself. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my story. But really, they had only set the stage for my greatest comeback yet. The Phoenix Lady was about to rise once more, and, this time, from the ashes of broken family ties. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive, interrupted by remembered snippets of conversation and the hollow feeling in my chest. But as I showered and dressed in my charcoal gray suit, the one I reserved for important business meetings, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The house was quiet. My children and their families were still asleep, undoubtedly exhausted. From their day of scheming and feasting, I made coffee but didn't prepare breakfast for anyone. Those days were over. I scrawled a brief note, "Had an appointment. Help yourselves," and left it on the kitchen counter surrounded by the dirty dishes they'd left for me to clean. It was barely light when I backed my car out of the driveway. A thin layer of frost covered the lawn, and my breath fogged in the cold November air. The streets of Mapleton Heights were deserted, everyone still recovering from their Thanksgiving celebrations. I drove in silence, no radio, no distractions, mentally preparing for the conversation ahead. Edward Hargrove's law office occupied the top floor of the historic Adamson building downtown. I'd been there only a handful of times over the years when Thomas and I had our wills drawn up, when I needed advice after his death, and once when I'd updated my will after the grandchildren were born. Edward had been Thomas's roommate in college, best man at our wedding. He knew our family history, understood the values Thomas and I had tried to instill in our children. His assistant hadn't arrived yet, but Edward was waiting for me, silver-haired and distinguished in a navy suit, his office lights casting a warm glow against the gray morning. He stood when I entered, concern evident in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, coming around his desk to grasp my hands. "You look terrible. What's happened?" I managed a thin smile. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Edward, especially after a holiday." "Of course. Sit, please. Coffee?" I nodded, and he poured me a cup from the carafe on his credenza before settling into his chair. "Now," he said, folding his hands on his desk, "tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath and recounted everything: the sudden Thanksgiving invitation, the campaign to get me to sell my home, the overheard conversation about seeking power of attorney, and finally, the humiliation of being banished to the kitchen during the holiday meal. As I spoke, Edward's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Those ungrateful little—" He caught himself. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I know they're your children. But Thomas, would be appalled. Yes, I said quietly. He would be. And that's partly why I'm here. I need to protect myself, Edward. And I need to make some changes. He nodded, pulling a legal pad toward him. What exactly do you have in mind? First, I want to ensure they can never force me out of my home or take control of my finances, no matter what tactics they might try. Edward made a note. We can create an irrevocable trust for the house and your major assets. It would make it virtually impossible for anyone to gain control without your explicit consent. Good. That's a start. I took a sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. Second, I want to change my will. He glanced up. Completely? Yes. I'm removing my children as primary beneficiaries. Edward set down his pen. Eleanor, are you certain? This is a significant decision. Perhaps after things cool down. They've shown their true colors, Edward. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated. They see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. I leaned forward. Do you know what? Jason said. That they should look into power of attorney because of my age and stubbornness. My own son, discussing ways to legally strip me of my autonomy. Edward's expression hardened. I understand. What would you like to do instead? I've given it a lot of thought. I'd like to establish a foundation in Thomas's name. The Thomas Mitchell Educational Trust. The bulk of my estate would go to providing scholarships for disadvantaged children who've lost a parent, the kind of students Thomas always went the extra mile for. A small smile touched Edward's lips. He would have loved that. I believe he would. I paused. I'm not completely disinheriting my children. They'll each receive a modest sum, enough to know they weren't forgotten, but not the windfall they're expecting. And the grandchildren will have trusts for their education. Edward made detailed notes, asking clarifying questions. For over an hour, we outlined the new estate plan, discussing legal structures, tax implications, and safeguards to prevent challenges to the will. There's one more thing, I said as our meeting was drawing to a close. I want to sell my financial advisory practice. Edward looked up, surprised. You love that business. You built it from nothing. I do love it, but I think it's time for a change. I've had an offer from Kingston Financial. They've wanted to acquire my client list for years. The terms are generous, and they'll retain my current staff. What? Will you do? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Live, Edward. Travel. Write that book I've always talked about. Volunteer. I've spent my entire adult life taking care of others. First Thomas and the children, then my clients. I think it's time I took care of myself. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Thomas always said you were the strongest person he knew. I'm seeing that now. I wasn't strong yesterday, I admitted. Sitting alone in that kitchen, I felt smaller than I've ever felt. Sometimes we need to hit bottom before we find the strength to rise, Edward said. The question is, what are you going to do about your immediate situation? Your children are still in your home. I hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of returning to the house, facing their manipulative concern and thinly veiled greed, made my stomach clench. I don't know, I admitted. I can't throw them out on the day after Thanksgiving, but I also can't pretend everything is normal. Edward considered this. You could stay at the Madison Hotel for a few days. Give yourself some space to think. Run away from my own home? That seems like surrendering. Not surrendering, strategic retreat. Sometimes distance provides clarity. He paused, and it might be interesting to see how they react when you don't return as expected. Thought was tempting. A quiet hotel room, no dirty dishes, no sideways glances, no conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I'll think about it, I said. In the meantime, how quickly can we implement these changes? I'll start the paperwork today. For the irrevocable trust, we could have documents ready for signature by Monday. The will changes might take a bit longer, but we can have preliminary documents drafted within a week. He hesitated. Eleanor, are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I met his gaze steadily. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. As I left Edward's office, a weight had lifted from my shoulders. For the first time since those brochures for Sunset Gardens had appeared on my coffee table, I felt in control again. The hurt was still there. A mother doesn't simply stop feeling pain when her children betray her, but now it was accompanied by resolve. I drove to the Madison, an elegant boutique hotel in the historic district. The lobby was decorated for Christmas already, a massive tree glittering with white lights, garlands draped along the mezzanine. It felt festive and anonymous, exactly what I needed. I booked a suite for 3 nights and called my assistant, Diane, asking her to bring me some clothes and essentials from my office, where I kept an emergency overnight bag. Then I turned off my phone and ordered room service. It was noon before I remembered that my house was full of people who might be wondering where I was. With a sigh, I turned my phone back on. 12 missed calls, 27 text messages, all from my children. Mom, where are you? Mom, call us. We're worried. This isn't funny. Call back immediately. We're about to call the police if you don't respond. The last one made me laugh out loud. The police. As if I were a wayward teenager who'd missed curfew. I was a 63-year-old woman who'd left her own house for a morning appointment. Their concern wasn't touching, it was controlling. I texted Rebecca. I'm fine. Had an early meeting, won't be home until late. Don't wait up. Her response was immediate. Where are you? We've been worried sick. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I silenced my phone, ordered a glass of wine, and drew a hot bath in the luxurious marble tub. As I soaked, I contemplated my next move. Edward was right. I needed distance to think clearly, but I also needed a plan for when I did return. Home. My children needed to understand that their behavior had consequences, that I was not a helpless old woman to be managed and manipulated. I was their mother, yes, but I was also Eleanor Mitchell, a woman who had rebuilt her life after devastating loss, who had created a successful business from nothing, who had faced down adversity with grace and determination. It was time they remembered that. I spent the afternoon in peaceful solitude, something I hadn't experienced in years. I read in the hotel's cozy library, enjoyed a solo dinner in the restaurant, and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I awoke to more missed calls and increasingly frantic texts. This time, I responded with a brief message to all 3 children. I'm taking some time for myself. We'll be in touch when I'm ready. House keys are in the usual place. When you leave. Then I turned my phone off again and met Diane for breakfast in the hotel restaurant. She was a decade younger than me, sharp-witted and fiercely loyal. I'd hired her 5 years ago when my business had expanded, and she'd quickly become indispensable, and something of a friend. So, she said after we'd ordered, are you going to tell me what's going on? Because you've never taken an unplanned day off in the entire time I've known you, let alone asked me to sneak clothes to you at a hotel. I hesitated, then told her everything. Unlike Edward, who had maintained professional composure, Diane's outrage was immediate and vivid. They made you eat in the kitchen, like Cinderella before the ball? Oh, I hope you're planning something truly devious in return. Despite everything, I smiled. Not devious, but decisive. I'm selling the business. Diane's fork clattered onto her plate. What? To whom? When? To Kingston, and as soon as possible. She stared at me for a long moment. Is this because of what your kids did? Because if it is, that seems like an extreme reaction. It's not just that, I said, though I won't deny it was the catalyst. I've been thinking about making a change for a while now. Life is short. Diane, Thomas's death taught me that. I've spent 15 years building this business and I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but I'm tired of being the Phoenix Lady. I want to see who else I can be. And what about the staff? What about me? Kingston has agreed to retain everyone at their current salaries and benefits. That was non-negotiable for me. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And you, my friend, are getting a promotion. They want you to head the division. You'll get a substantial raise and equity options. Her eyes widened. You negotiated that for me? Without telling me? I know your worth, even if you sometimes don't. I smiled. So what do you think? Ready to take the reins? She sat back, blinking rapidly. I think I need a mimosa with this breakfast. We spent the morning discussing the transition, the clients who might need special attention, the workflows that could be improved. It felt good to focus on practical matters, to make plans for a future that suddenly seemed wide open with possibility. After Diane left, I wandered through the shops in the historic district, buying a few new outfits. Not the practical professional clothes I usually wore, but items chosen purely because they delighted me. A scarlet cashmere sweater, earrings made from sea glass, a butter-soft leather journal, small rebellions against the sensible Eleanor everyone expected me to be. In a small art gallery, I found myself drawn to a painting of a woman standing, alone on a cliff edge, her arms outstretched, her hair wild in the wind. The plaque beside it read, "Liberation." Without hesitation, I bought it. It would be the first piece in my new collection. Art chosen by me, for me, without considering anyone else's taste or opinions. By evening, I felt almost lightheaded with freedom. I hadn't realized how constrained I'd felt until the constraints were removed. For 15 years, every decision I'd made had been filtered through the lens of my responsibilities, to my children, to my business, to Thomas's memory. Now I was making choices solely for myself, and it was intoxicating. I turned my phone back on to find fewer messages than before. Apparently, my children had decided to respect my request for space, or more likely, they'd given up trying to reach me and gone back to their own lives. There was, however, a text from Martin, my financial advisor and friend. Your daughter, Rebecca, called me asking questions about your finances. Said you were considering assisted living and needed help. Planning. Something felt off. Call me when you can. A chill ran through me. So they were already making moves, reaching out to my financial team, trying to gain access to information about my assets. I called Martin immediately. Eleanor, he answered, on the first ring. Are you all right? I've been worried. I'm fine, Martin. Better than fine, actually. But I need to fill you in on some things. I gave him a condensed version of recent events, including my meetings with Edward and my decision to sell the business. Jesus, he muttered when I finished. I knew something was off about that call. Rebecca was asking very specific questions about your liquid assets, the house value, whether you had long-term care insurance. What did you tell her? Nothing, of course. Client confidentiality isn't just a preference, it's the law. I said I couldn't discuss your finances without your explicit permission. He paused. She didn't take it well. Said something about you making irrational decisions lately and the family being concerned. Irrational? I laughed without humor. Is it irrational to want to keep the home I've lived in for a decade? To make my own financial decisions at 63? Of course not. But Eleanor, you should know. This kind of thing. Adult children trying to gain control of their parents. Assets. It happens more often than you might think. And it can get ugly. It already has, I said quietly. What are you going to do? I considered his question. First, I'm going to make sure my assets are protected. Edward is setting up an irrevocable trust. I'd like you to work with him On that. Of course. And after that? I'm going to reclaim my life, Martin, starting with my home. After we hung up, I sat on the hotel balcony, watching as the shops below turned on their holiday lights. Christmas music drifted up from the street. Couples strolled hand in hand, shopping bags swinging. Normal life continuing all around me while mine had been upended. But upheaval wasn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it was necessary, clearing the ground to make room for new growth. I thought about the business I was leaving behind, the house I would return to, the children who had betrayed me but whom I still loved, despite everything. I thought about Thomas, who had always encouraged me to follow my heart, to be brave in the face of fear. I'm trying, love, I whispered to the evening sky. I'm trying to be brave. On Sunday morning, I checked out of the Madison and drove home. The driveway was empty when I arrived, no sign of my children's cars. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment as I unlocked the front door. Part of me had hoped they would still be there, that we could have the conversation that needed to happen. Another part was grateful for the reprieve. The house was immaculate. They'd cleaned up before leaving, put everything back in its place. On the kitchen counter sat a vase of fresh flowers and a note in Rebecca's precise handwriting. Mom, we're worried about you. This behavior is exactly why we think you need more support. We've gone home, but we'll check in soon. Please call us when you're ready to have a rational conversation about your future. Love, Rebecca, Jason, and Emma. I crumpled the note and threw it away, my momentary relief replaced by simmering anger. Their concern wasn't concern at all. It was control disguised as care. They hadn't reflected on their behavior or considered my feelings. They had simply doubled down on their narrative that I was the problem. I spent the day reclaiming my space, moving furniture, rearranging artwork, small changes that made the house feel mine again. I replaced family photos with art pieces I loved but had stored away because they didn't match the aesthetic my children preferred. I moved my reading chair to the sunniest spot in the living room, a position Rebecca had always criticized because it disrupted the flow of the room. By evening, I felt settled enough to make the call I'd been avoiding. I chose Rebecca first, the ringleader, the one who had taken my seat at the head of the table. Mom? She answered immediately. Thank God. We've been so worried. Have you? I kept my voice even. It seemed to me you were more concerned about my house and my money than my well-being. A pause. That's not fair. We're concerned about all of it. Your health, your safety, your financial security. My financial security is excellent, Rebecca. You know that. I've made sure of it. Yes, but as you age... I'm 63, I interrupted. Not ancient, not infirm, not mentally diminished. She sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. Mom, we're just trying to help you plan for the future. All of us are worried about you rattling around in that big house alone. The house that you and your siblings want me to sell so you can access your inheritance early? What? Her shock seemed genuine. That's not, we never said. I heard you, Rebecca, all of you, discussing power of attorney, leveraging a diagnosis, trying to pressure me through Martin. I kept my voice steady. And then making me eat Thanksgiving dinner alone in my kitchen while you all enjoyed the meal I prepared. Do you have any idea how that felt? Silence stretched between us. Then softly, we thought you'd be more comfortable there. You were up and down serving anyway. Don't. My voice hardened. Don't try to reframe what happened. You deliberately excluded me from my own table in my own home. You treated me like the help, not like your mother. Mom, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. And I think you've forgotten who I am, Rebecca. I am not some doddering old woman to be managed and manipulated. I am your mother. I raised you after your father died. I put you through law school. I have supported you in every endeavor, celebrated every victory, comforted you through every defeat. I took a deep breath. And I will not be treated like an inconvenience or an obstacle. No one thinks of you that way, she protested weakly. Actions speak louder than words, and your actions have been crystal clear. I paused. I've made some decisions I want you to be aware of. What decisions? Her voice had taken on the sharp, lawyerly tone she used in court. I've updated my estate plan. The house and the majority of my assets will no longer be passing directly to you and your siblings. What? Her composure cracked. Mom, you can't do that. That's our inheritance. Dad would have wanted— Don't you dare tell me what Thomas would have wanted, I said, my voice low and dangerous. He would have been appalled by your behavior, by all of your behavior. He raised you to be better than this. This is because we suggested assisted living? Because we're concerned about you living alone? You're punishing us for caring? No, Rebecca. I'm responding to your attempt to control me and access my assets before I'm even dead. There's a difference. I softened my tone slightly. You and your siblings won't be left with nothing. But the bulk of my estate will go to establish the Thomas Mitchell Educational Trust, providing scholarships for disadvantaged children who've lost a parent. She was silent for so long I thought the call might have dropped. Then, in a small voice, Dad would have liked that. Yes, he would have. I let the silence stretch between us, giving her time to absorb what I'd said. I've also decided to sell my business. I'm going to travel, write, live my life on my terms. You're selling the business? She sounded genuinely shocked. But you love it. You built it from nothing. I do love it, and I'm proud of what I built, but it's time for something new. Another long pause. Is this all because of what happened at Thanksgiving? Because if it is, we can talk about it. We can fix this. It's not just about Thanksgiving, Rebecca. It's about the past months of manipulation, the brochures for Sunset Gardens, the conversations about my irrational behavior, the calls to Martin behind my back. It's about the fact that not one of you, not one, has asked what I want. And what do you want, Mom? The question caught me off guard. It was the first time any of my children had actually asked. I want to be treated with respect. I want to make my own decisions about my life, my home, my finances. I want to be your mother, not your ward or your inheritance. I took a deep breath. And right now, I want some space to figure out what comes next. Are you cutting us out of your life? Her voice trembled. No, Rebecca. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. I paused. I love you, all of you. That hasn't changed, but our relationship needs to change. I won't be manipulated, controlled, or disrespected, not even by my own children. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, emotionally, drained but strangely at peace. The conversation had been difficult, painful even, but necessary. I'd said my truth. I'd stood my ground. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt fully myself. Not just a mother, not just a widow, not just a financial advisor, but Eleanor Mitchell, a woman with her own dreams, her own boundaries, and her own path forward. The phone calls with Jason and Emma were variations on the same theme: shock, defensiveness, grudging acceptance. None of them apologized, not really. But then, I hadn't expected them to. True reconciliation, if it came at all, would take time. In the days that followed, I threw myself into action. I met with Kingston Financial to finalize the sale of my business. I worked with Edward to establish the irrevocable trust and update my will. I researched writing workshops in Tuscany and art retreats in New Mexico. I started a list titled Places to See Before I Die, and added to it daily. My children kept their distance, communicating primarily through terse text messages. I gave them space, knowing they needed time to adjust to the new reality. A mother who was not at their beck and call, whose assets were not their safety net, whose life was her own. The first sign of a thaw came a week before Christmas. Emma called, her voice tentative. "Mom? I've been thinking a lot about Thanksgiving, about everything, really." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral. "Yeah, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for Thanksgiving, but for going along with Rebecca and Jason about the house and everything else. It wasn't right." I closed my eyes, a wave of emotion washing over me. "Thank you for saying that, Emma." "I miss you," she said softly. "And I've been thinking about what you said, about setting up a foundation in Dad's name. I think it's a wonderful idea. Actually, I was wondering, would you like some help with it? I have experience writing grant guidelines from my work at the school district. It was an olive branch, small but significant. I would like that very much." We agreed to meet for lunch the following week. As I hung up, I noticed the liberation painting I'd bought, now hanging in a place of honor in my living room. The woman on the cliff, arms outstretched, facing the unknown future with courage and hope. It was how I felt, poised on the edge of a new chapter, uncertain but exhilarated. I had lost something precious in the events of Thanksgiving. The illusion that my children saw me as I truly was, that they valued me beyond what I could provide for them. But I had gained something equally precious, a renewed sense of self, a clearer vision for my future, and the courage to claim it. The Phoenix Lady was rising again, but this time not from the ashes of loss or tragedy. This time, I was rising. From the complacency of a life lived too long for others, stepping into the brilliant unknown of a life lived for myself. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Spring arrived in Mapleton Heights with an explosion of color. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, daffodils pushed through the soil in my garden, and the air carried the sweet scent of renewal. It had been 4 months since that fateful Thanksgiving, and while the hurt hadn't disappeared entirely, it had transformed into something different. A dull ache rather than a sharp pain, a reminder rather than a wound. The sale of my business had been finalized in January, bringing both a substantial influx of cash and an unexpected sense of liberation. Diane was thriving in her new leadership role, calling occasionally to update me or ask advice, but mostly to share her triumphs. I was proud of her, proud of what we'd built together, and satisfied with my decision to pass the torch. My home had undergone a transformation as well. Gone were the formal spaces designed to impress others, replaced by rooms that reflected my true tastes and interests. The dining room where I'd been excluded now housed my art studio, filled with canvases, paints, and the soft northern light I'd always admired. The formal living room had become a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the most comfortable reading chair money could buy. Every room now served a purpose that brought me joy, not just one that met others' expectations. I'd spent February in Tuscany, attending a writing workshop in a centuries-old villa surrounded by olive groves. There, I'd begun writing my memoirs, not the sanitized version I might once have created to protect my children's feelings, but the raw, honest account of a woman who had loved, lost, rebuilt, and discovered herself anew in her 6th decade. The words flowed easily, as if they'd been waiting all this time for permission to emerge. March had taken me to Santa Fe for an art retreat, where I discovered a talent for watercolors I never knew I possessed. My instructor, a renowned painter, in her 80s, had pulled me aside on the final day. "You have a gift," she'd said, her eyes bright behind round spectacles. "Not just for technique, but for seeing, truly seeing, the world around you. Don't waste it." I'd returned home with a portfolio of paintings and a commission to create a series for a local gallery. Me, Eleanor Mitchell, an artist, It still felt surreal. Throughout these months of exploration and growth, my relationship with my children had remained strained but evolving. Emma had been the first to genuinely reach out, and our lunch to discuss the educational foundation had led to regular meetings. She'd thrown herself into the project with genuine enthusiasm, researching similar foundations, drafting mission statements, identifying potential board members. It gave us common ground, neutral territory where we could rebuild our connection without directly addressing the painful past. Jason had been next to thaw, calling in late January with a stilted apology and an invitation to dinner. The conversation had been awkward, punctuated by long silences and careful words, but it was a start. His wife Veronica had surprised me by pulling me aside as I was leaving. "He's trying," she'd whispered. "He feels terrible about Thanksgiving. About all of it. He just doesn't know how to say it." "I know," I'd replied, "and I'm trying too." Rebecca had been the hardest nut to crack. As the primary architect of the assisted living scheme, she had the most pride to swallow, the most difficult admission to make. Our interactions remained formal, limited to necessary communications about family matters. She hadn't directly apologized, though she'd sent a peace offering of sorts, a beautiful potted orchid with a note that read simply, "Thinking of you." It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something. On this particular April morning, I was enjoying coffee on my back porch, watching robins hunt for worms in the dewy grass when my phone rang. It was Edward. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "how's my favorite client?" "Hardly your favorite," I laughed. "But I'm well. Just finalized plans for a photography tour in Iceland next month." "Iceland? You're certainly embracing this new chapter." "I am. It's been freeing." I took a sip of coffee. "But I suspect you didn't call to hear about my travel plans." "No." His tone shifted, becoming more professional. "I wanted to let you know that the Thomas Mitchell Educational Trust is officially established. All the paperwork is complete, the board structure approved. We can begin accepting applications for the first round of scholarships whenever you're ready." A surge of emotion caught me off guard. "That's wonderful news, Edward. Thank you." "Don't thank me. This was your vision. I just helped with the legal framework." He paused. "There is one other matter. Rebecca called me yesterday." My grip tightened on the phone. "Oh?" "Yes. She asked about serving on the foundation's board. Said Emma had mentioned there were still seats to be filled." I blinked in surprise. Rebecca wanted to be involved with the foundation? The daughter who had been most vocal about her inheritance now wanted to help direct it instead. "Did she say why?" I asked carefully. "She said, and I quote, 'It's what Dad would have wanted.' Then she added that she has experience with nonprofit governance through her pro bono work." I sat back, considering this unexpected development. "What do you think, Edward? Is this a genuine change of heart, or a way to maintain some control over the assets?" "I can't say for certain, but she seemed sincere." He hesitated. "People can surprise us, Eleanor. Sometimes even for the better." After we hung up, I remained on the porch, mulling over this new information. Rebecca had been the hardest hit by the change to my will, the most resistant to the idea of the foundation. Was her interest now genuine? Or was it, as I'd suggested, to Edward, an attempt to maintain some influence over what she'd once viewed as her rightful inheritance? I was still pondering this question when a text arrived from Emma. "Mom, are you free for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss." We met at Gardenia, a small cafe with an outdoor patio overlooking the town square. Emma was already seated. When I arrived, nursing an iced tea and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mom," she said, standing to embrace me, "you look wonderful. Tuscany and Santa Fe clearly agreed with you." "They did," I smiled, settling into my chair. "But so has being home, honestly. The house feels like mine again." A shadow crossed her face. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. About the house, about Thanksgiving, about all of it. She took a deep breath. I never properly apologized. Not really, and I want to now. I stayed silent, giving her space to continue. What I did, was inexcusable. Trying to pressure you to sell your home, going along with Rebecca's plan to move you to Sunset Gardens, and then that. Awful Thanksgiving dinner. She shook her head, eyes bright with unshed tears. I keep thinking about how it must have felt, sitting alone in the kitchen while we ate in the dining room. It makes me physically ill. It was humiliating, I said quietly. But what hurt? More was realizing that my children saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. Not me, she protested. I never... She stopped herself. No, that's not entirely true. I didn't actively see you that way, but I didn't stop it either. I let Rebecca and Jason talk about your assets, your house, as if they were already ours, to distribute. I was complicit through my silence. She reached across the table, taking my hand. And I'm so sorry, Mom. The genuine remorse in her voice touched something in me. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot. She squeezed my hand before releasing it. There's something else I wanted to tell you. Rebecca is planning to ask about joining the foundation board. Edward mentioned she had called him. Yes, but... Emma hesitated. I want you to know it was her idea, not something we pushed her into. She came to me asking about the foundation, about how she could get involved. I think she's trying to make amends in her own way. And you believe her sincerity? Emma considered this. I do. She was the most upset about the changes to your will, it's true. But I think that shock forced her to really examine her behavior, her motivations. And she didn't like what she saw. She met my gaze directly. People can change, Mom, even stubborn, controlling big sisters. We lingered over lunch, the conversation, shifting to lighter topics, Emma's work, my writing, the upcoming summer. As we were preparing to leave, Emma said, There's one more thing. We, Jason, Rebecca, and I, would like to have you over for dinner next Sunday, at Rebecca's house. I raised an eyebrow. All of you? Together? Yes. With the spouses and kids, too. A family dinner. She smiled tentatively. No hidden agendas. I promise. Just... family. I considered the invitation. The last family gathering had ended in hurt and betrayal. Was I ready to risk that again? But the Emma sitting across from me now was different from the one who had participated in my exclusion from the Thanksgiving table. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. All right, I said finally. Sunday dinner at Rebecca's. But I'm bringing dessert, and I expect a seat at the main table. Emma laughed, relief washing over her face. Front and center, Mom. I promise. The week leading up to Sunday's dinner was busy. I finalized plans for the Iceland trip, attended a meeting with the nascent foundation board, and finished a watercolor commission for a local client. But underlying all these activities was a nervous anticipation about the upcoming family gathering. Rebecca's home was a stately Tudor in the most exclusive neighborhood of Mapleton Heights. As I walked up the curved driveway on Sunday evening, my arms full of a homemade tiramisu, I felt a flutter of anxiety. The last time I'd seen all my children together had been Thanksgiving. Would this dinner be different, or was I walking into another ambush? The door opened before I could ring the bell. Rebecca stood there, impeccably dressed as always, but with an uncharacteristic uncertainty in her posture. Mom, she said, stepping aside to let me in. Thank you for coming. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of roasting chicken and the sound of children's laughter from somewhere upstairs. Jason and Veronica were in the living room, chatting with Emma and Alexis. They all looked up as I entered, conversations pausing momentarily, Eleanor, Veronica said, breaking the slight tension, let me take that dessert. It looks amazing. As she disappeared into the kitchen with the tiramisu, Jason approached, giving me a somewhat stiff hug. Good to see you, Mom. Emma says you're off to Iceland soon? In 3 weeks, I confirmed. A photography tour of the southern coast. Photography? His eyebrows rose. Since when do you take pictures? Since January, I smiled. It turns out there are a lot of things about me you don't know. The slight barb wasn't lost on him, but he took it gracefully, nodding with a rueful smile. I'm learning that. Dinner was served in Rebecca's formal dining room, a space designed to impress with its crystal chandelier and antique mahogany table. I was seated at Rebecca's right, a position of honor that didn't escape my notice. The meal was delicious, the conversation flowing more easily than I had expected. We discussed safe topics, the children's activities, upcoming summer plans, local news, carefully avoiding the elephants in the room, Thanksgiving, the changed will, the months of strained relations. It wasn't until dessert was served that Rebecca cleared her throat, tapping her spoon gently against her water glass to get everyone's attention. I want to say something, she began, her lawyer's composure momentarily slipping to reveal genuine emotion. First, thank you all for being here tonight, especially you, Mom. She turned to face me directly. I've been trying to find the right words for months now, and they never seem adequate. But I need to say this. I'm sorry. Deeply, profoundly sorry for what happened at Thanksgiving and for everything leading up to it. A hush fell over the table. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment, their usual fidgeting stilled. I convinced myself I was acting out of concern for you, Rebecca continued, that I knew better than you what you needed. But the truth is, I was thinking about what was convenient for me, what benefited me financially. She took a shaky breath. It was selfish, manipulative, and cruel. And I'm ashamed of my behavior. I sat perfectly still, absorbing her words, searching her face for any sign of insincerity. But all I saw was my eldest daughter, stripped of her usual armor of competence and control, vulnerable in her remorse. When you changed your will, she went on, my first reaction was anger. How dare you redirect what I'd already mentally allocated as mine? She shook her head. But then I had to confront an uncomfortable truth. That money was never mine to begin with. It was yours, earned through your hard work, your sacrifices, your intelligence. You had every right to do with it as you pleased. A tear slipped down her cheek, a rare display of emotion from my usually composed daughter. And then I learned about the foundation, about what you were creating in Dad's name. And I felt humbled, because it was so perfectly him, so perfectly what he would have wanted. While I had been counting an inheritance that wasn't mine, you were building a legacy that truly honored him. She reached for my hand across the table. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I know trust has to be rebuilt. But I want you to know that I'm committed to that process, however long it takes. And I would be honored to help with the foundation, to be part of Dad's legacy in whatever way you think is appropriate. The table remained silent as her words hung in the air. I looked around at the faces of my family, Jason, stoic but nodding in agreement, Emma, openly wiping away tears, the spouses watching respectfully, the grandchildren confused but sensing the weight of the moment. And finally, I looked at Rebecca, my firstborn, so like me in her determination and pride, now offering the most difficult thing for someone like us, a genuine apology, an admission of wrongdoing. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal to me. The tension around the table visibly eased. As if on cue, Rebecca's twins began chattering. About school, Veronica started clearing plates, and the moment of raw emotion gave way to the comfortable bustle of family life. Later, as I was preparing to leave, Rebecca walked me to my car. "I meant what I said in there," she said quietly. "Every word." "I know you did." I turned to face her in the soft glow of the porch light. "And yes, I'd like you to serve on the foundation board. Your legal expertise will be valuable." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I promise I won't let you down." "I know you won't." I hesitated, then added, "This foundation, it's not just about the money, Rebecca. It's about who your father was, what he believed in, the students he would stay late to help, the families he supported through crisis, the quiet ways he made a difference." "I remember," she said softly. "He used to bring home stories about his students. He knew all their names, their dreams, their struggles." "Yes." I smiled at the memory. "And now, through this foundation, those kinds of students will have a chance they might not otherwise have had. That's a legacy worth building." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the spring night air cool around us. "I'm proud of you, you know," I said finally. "Not just for tonight, but for the woman you've become. You're strong, determined, brilliant, just like your father." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I always thought I was more like you." "Maybe a bit of both," I conceded with a smile. "The best parts, I hope." The drive home was peaceful, my mind replaying the evening, not just Rebecca's apology, but the subtle shifts I'd noticed in all my children. Jason's careful attentiveness, so different from his previous clinical detachment. Emma's quiet confidence in facilitating family harmony. And most surprisingly, Rebecca's willingness to be vulnerable, to admit her mistakes without qualification or excuse. They were growing, all of them. Not just in their careers or their families, but as people. And perhaps, in a strange way, the Thanksgiving disaster had been the catalyst for that growth. My phone pinged with a text as I pulled into my driveway. It was from Jason. "Dinner next Sunday at our house? Veronica wants to try out a new recipe." I smiled and typed back, "I'd love to. Tell Veronica I'll bring the wine." Inside my house, my sanctuary, my domain, I kicked off my shoes and poured a small glass of brandy. I carried it to my art studio, where the moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the half-finished canvas on my easel. It was a painting of a family table, seen from the perspective of someone standing slightly apart, watching the scene unfold. I'd begun it after Thanksgiving, working on it in fits and starts, never quite able to complete it. Now, sipping my brandy, I studied the composition with fresh eyes. The painting had begun as an expression of exclusion, of being relegated to the margins of my own family. But tonight had shifted something fundamental. Perhaps the perspective needed to change, not someone excluded, but someone seeing clearly for the first time, someone choosing their place at the table rather than having it assigned to them. I set down my glass and picked up a brush, mixing fresh paint on my palette. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility and peace. In the morning, I would call Edward to discuss Rebecca's role on the foundation board. I would continue planning my Iceland adventure. I would live my life, not as an appendage to my children's expectations, but as the vibrant, independent woman I had become. The Phoenix Lady wasn't rising from ashes anymore. She was soaring, wings outstretched, claiming the vast sky as her own. And from that height, the view was breathtaking. Summer arrived with a lushness that seemed to mirror the new abundance in my life. The Iceland trip had been transformative, days spent capturing the otherworldly landscapes with my camera, evenings writing in my journal by the glow of the midnight sun. I'd returned with hundreds of photographs, several of which were now being displayed in a local gallery alongside my watercolors. The foundation was thriving under the guidance of its newly formed board. Rebecca had indeed proven herself invaluable, using her legal expertise to navigate the complexities of nonprofit regulations. Jason had surprised everyone by offering free medical consultations to scholarship recipients who lacked health care. And Emma continued to be the heart of the operation, connecting with potential candidates and sharing their stories with genuine compassion. Our Sunday family dinners had become a tradition again, rotating between houses. Sometimes we discussed foundation business, sometimes we simply enjoyed each other's company. The grandchildren had started calling me Adventuring Grandma, a title I wore with pride as I showed them photographs from my travels and taught them to paint with watercolors on rainy afternoons. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that occasionally resurfaced. Rebecca sometimes slipped into her controlling ways. Jason could still be emotionally distant. Emma occasionally tried too hard to please everyone, and I wasn't above reminding them of past hurts when disagreements arose. But we were trying, all of us. Learning to see each other as we truly were, not as the roles we'd assigned to one another. Learning to listen, to respect boundaries, to apologize when needed. Learning to be a family in a new way, not bound by obligation or expectation, but connected by choice and love. On a warm July evening, I hosted a garden party to celebrate the first recipients of the Thomas Mitchell Educational Scholarships. 5 students, all from backgrounds of hardship, all bright with potential and determination. They moved through my garden with wide eyes and hopeful hearts, sharing their stories with Foundation board members, donors, and my proudly supportive family. As twilight fell and fairy lights twinkled in the trees, I found a quiet moment alone on the porch swing. The sounds of laughter and conversation drifted from the garden, a pleasant backdrop to my reflections. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Rebecca, holding 2 glasses of champagne. I patted the seat beside me and she settled in, handing me one of the glasses. "Quite a success," she said, nodding toward the gathering. "Dad would have been so proud." Yes, he would have. I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles dancing on my tongue. Not just of the foundation, but of you, of all of you. She was quiet for a moment, watching the party. "You know, I was thinking about last Thanksgiving, about how differently things might have gone if we'd just asked you what you wanted instead of deciding we knew best." But then I might never have called Edward," I teased gently. "Never started the foundation. Never discovered my talent for painting or photography. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." She laughed softly. "Is that your way of saying we did you a favor by being terrible children?" "Not exactly," I smiled. "But adversity has a way of revealing our true strength. I needed that reminder that I am more than just your mother. That I have dreams and talents of my own. That my life is still unfolding, not winding down." Rebecca leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that it brought a lump to my throat. "I'm glad you reminded us too," she said quietly. "Even if your method was a bit dramatic." "Dramatic? Me?" I laughed. "I can't imagine where you get that from." We sat in comfortable silence, watching as Jason's son chased fireflies across the lawn, his face alight with wonder. Emma and Alexis were deep in conversation with one of the scholarship recipients, their expressions animated. The garden hummed with life and possibility. "To new traditions," Rebecca said, raising her glass. "And to you, Mom, the Phoenix Lady." I clinked my glass against hers, smiling at the old nickname. "To new beginnings," I corrected gently. "For all of us." As the night deepened and stars appeared overhead, I found myself filled with a profound gratitude. Not just for the family gathered in my garden, imperfect but trying, or for the new purpose we'd found in the foundation, but for that painful Thanksgiving that had forced us all to confront hard truths, to grow in ways we might otherwise have avoided. Sometimes, I thought, watching the joyful scene before me, the meals we don't get to eat led us to the feasts. we truly need. And sometimes being sent away from the table is just the beginning of finding our rightful place. As autumn returned to Mapleton Heights, I found myself reflecting on the year that had passed since that fateful Thanksgiving. The trees along my street were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson, mirroring the transformation that had occurred in my own life. 1 year, that's all it had taken to dismantle a family dynamic decades in the making and rebuild something healthier in its place. I was sitting in my art studio, formerly the dining room where I'd been excluded, working on a new series of paintings inspired by my travels, when the doorbell rang. It was Martin, my financial advisor and friend, stopping by with the quarterly report on the foundation's investments. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly, accepting the coffee I offered. "The studio looks amazing. You've really found your calling." I smiled, gesturing to the canvases lining the walls, Iceland's dramatic landscapes, Tuscany's rolling hills, and most recently, the stark beauty of the American Southwest, where I'd spent 2 weeks in September. It's been a revelation. I keep wondering why I waited so long to pick up a brush. "Sometimes we need a push to discover what we're meant to do," he said, setting his briefcase on the small table by the window. "Speaking of which, the foundation's investments are performing exceptionally well. We're on track to fund 3 additional scholarships next year." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's wonderful news. Thomas would be so pleased." "He would." Martin paused, studying me over the rim of his coffee cup. "And how are things with the family? Still improving?" "Better than I could have imagined, honestly." I settled into the chair opposite him. "We've found a new balance. It's not perfect, but it's real. Authentic in a way our relationship hasn't been for years." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "No. When Rebecca called me that day, trying to get information about your finances, I was genuinely concerned. I've seen families torn apart over inheritance issues. Adult children seeing their parents as nothing more than a balance sheet." He shook his head. "I never expected things to turn around so completely." "Neither did I admitted. "But that's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, the only way to go is up." After Martin left, I returned to my painting, but my thoughts remained on our conversation. 1 year ago, I had been devastated, humiliated, my sense of self-worth shattered by my children's betrayal. Now, I was thriving. My art was selling in local galleries, my memoir was being considered by a small publishing house, and the foundation bearing Thomas's name was changing young lives. Most importantly, my relationship with my children had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation. The journey hadn't been easy. After that initial dinner at Rebecca's, where she'd offered her heartfelt apology, there had been months of careful rebuilding. Weekly therapy sessions, both individually and as a family. Difficult conversations where old hurts were aired and acknowledged. Boundaries established and respected. Expectations adjusted on all sides. I'd learned to see my children not just as extensions of myself, but as complex adults with their own flaws and virtues. Rebecca's controlling nature masked a deep-seated fear of loss, stemming from her father's unexpected death. Jason's emotional distance was his way of coping with the pressures of his medical career, where attachment often led to heartbreak. Emma's excessive people-pleasing came from years of trying to keep peace in a family of strong personalities. And they, in turn, had learned to see me not just as their mother, a role they'd both revered and taken for granted, but as Eleanor Mitchell, a woman with dreams, talents, and a life independent of theirs. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Rebecca. "Mom, I just got off a call with the Westfield Foundation. They're interested in partnering with us, potentially doubling our scholarship fund for next year." "That's incredible news," I said, setting down my paintbrush. "How did you manage that?" "I'd love to take credit, but it was actually your speech at the summer gala that caught their attention. The director specifically mentioned how moved she was by your vision." Rebecca paused. You're really good at this, you know. The public-facing role, sharing the mission, connecting with donors. Dad would be so proud. Thank you, sweetheart. I blinked back unexpected tears. That means a lot. Listen, while I've got you, Jason and I were talking about Thanksgiving. We know it might be a difficult anniversary, given what happened last year, so we thought maybe we could do something completely different. Break tradition entirely. My grip tightened on the phone. What did you have in mind? Well, you mentioned wanting to see the Grand Canyon. What if we all went there for Thanksgiving week? Rented a house big enough for everyone, did a completely non-traditional holiday? No formal dinner, no assigned seating, just family time. In a new setting. I found myself smiling at the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. The Grand Canyon for Thanksgiving? That actually sounds wonderful. Really? I wasn't sure if you'd want to travel so soon after your Southwest trip. For this, I'd make an exception. I hesitated, then added, You're right that the anniversary might be difficult. Creating a new tradition seems like the perfect solution. After we hung up, I walked through my house, my sanctuary, my domain, appreciating how it had evolved to reflect who I truly was, not who others expected me to. The formal spaces had been repurposed for creativity and comfort. Family photos now mingled with my artwork and treasures from my travels. It was still the same structure where I'd raised my family, but now it was unmistakably mine. In the kitchen, the very room where I'd been relegated to eat alone last Thanksgiving, I'd hung a small painting I'd created during my darkest days after the incident. It depicted a solitary figure seated at a small table, a feast spread before them, but no one to share it with. I'd titled it Exclusion. Beside it hung a companion piece completed just last month, the same figure, now surrounded by others at a table under an open sky. Everyone's faces turned toward each other in genuine connection. This one I'd titled Belonging. The paired painting served as a daily reminder of how far we'd come, of how crisis had eventually led to healing. The doorbell chimed again, and I opened it to find Emma on my doorstep, arms full of groceries. "Surprise cooking lesson," she announced, bustling past me into the kitchen. I found Grandma Mitchell's pumpkin pie recipe and thought we could make it together. For practice, before the Grand Canyon trip. I laughed, following her. I've been making that pie for 40 years. I think I've got the hang of it. Yes, but I haven't, she said, unpacking ingredients. And if we're creating new traditions, I want to carry forward the best parts of the old ones. Your pumpkin pie definitely qualifies. As we worked side by side, rolling out crust and mixing filling, I marveled at how naturally we had fallen into this new rhythm. Mother and daughter, certainly, but also friends, equals, two women who respected each other's strengths and accommodated each other's weaknesses. Rebecca said you're thinking of expanding your travel next year, Emma commented, carefully crimping the pie crust's edge. Southeast Asia? I'm considering it. There's a watercolor retreat in Bali that looks fascinating. I added the spices. To the filling, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg rising between us. Though I'd also like to spend more time working with the foundation. Finding the right balance is tricky. Emma nodded thoughtfully. You know, that's something Dad always admired about you. Your ability to balance competing priorities, to make room for what matters most. He was the same way, I replied softly. So much of his time went to his students, but he never missed a single one of your debates, or Jason's baseball games, or Rebecca's dance recitals. I remember. Emma smiled, a hint of sadness touching her eyes. He always said time was the most valuable gift you could give someone. That showing up was an act of love. It is, I agreed, thinking of all the Sunday dinners we'd shared over the past year, the family therapy sessions, the foundation meetings, all of us showing up again and again to rebuild what had been broken. Sometimes the simplest acts are the most profound. Later, as the pie baked and filled the house with its comforting aroma, Emma and I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in light blankets against the autumn chill. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "how things might have turned out if last Thanksgiving had gone differently? If we hadn't been so awful?" I considered her question carefully. I used to, in those first dark days afterward. I felt so betrayed, so hurt. I wanted to go back and undo it all. I paused, watching a leaf drift slowly from a nearby maple. But now, I'm not sure I would change it, even if I could. She looked at me in surprise. "Really? Even knowing how much pain it caused?" "The pain was terrible," I acknowledged. "But look what came from it. The foundation that's helping deserving students, my art, my writing, my travels, all the parts of myself I'd set aside or never discovered. And most importantly, our relationship now, honest, respectful, authentic, in a way it never was before." Emma leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture that reminded me of when she was small. "I'm so sorry we had to hurt you to get here." "I know, sweetheart." I wrapped my arm around her. "But sometimes the hardest experiences yield the greatest growth, for all of us." We sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no artist could fully capture. "Mom," Emma said softly, "I'm really glad you made that call to your lawyer." I smiled, thinking of Edward's office on that morning after Thanksgiving, how lost and angry I'd felt, how uncertain about what lay ahead. "So am I, Emma. So am I." The week before our Grand Canyon Thanksgiving trip, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a beautifully bound leather book. The cover bore a simple title, "The Phoenix Lady, Essays on Renewal." I opened it to find a collection of my own writings, pieces from my memoir, blog posts I'd written about my travels, reflections on art and aging and reinvention, professionally edited and compiled. A note slipped from between the pages, written in Rebecca's precise hand. "Mom, this is an advance copy. The publisher will contact you formally next week, but I couldn't wait to share it with you. Your words deserve to be heard beyond our family. Your journey deserves to be celebrated. With love and profound respect, Rebecca P.S." Look who wrote the foreword. I turned to the front of the book, and tears filled my eyes as I read the name. Foreword by Jason Mitchell, M.D. My son, my emotionally reserved, clinically detached son, had written a deeply personal essay about watching his mother transform from caretaker to creator, from background presence to vibrant force. He wrote, "Of regret and redemption, of learning to see one's parent as a complete human being, of the gift of second chances." And there, on the dedication page, were the words that broke the last piece of ice around my heart. For Thomas, who taught us the value of education, the power of kindness, and the importance of family. And for Eleanor, mother, artist, Phoenix, who taught us that it's never too late to rise from the ashes and claim your rightful place at the table. I closed the book, holding it against my chest as tears flowed freely down my cheeks. They were not tears of sadness or anger, not even tears of joy exactly, but something deeper. Tears of recognition, of being truly seen and valued for who I was, not just for what I had given. The journey from that Thanksgiving kitchen to this moment had been long and often painful. There had been dark days of doubt, difficult conversations, old wounds reopened before they could properly heal. But standing in my sun-filled art studio, holding the tangible proof of my children's understanding and respect, I knew with absolute certainty that every step had been necessary, every confrontation worthwhile. Last Thanksgiving, my children had made me eat in the kitchen, alone and excluded from the family I had created. That single act of cruelty had sparked a transformation none of us could have anticipated. A reclaiming of self, a rebuilding of relationships, a renewal of purpose. And as I prepared to join my family for a new kind of Thanksgiving celebration, I was filled with genuine gratitude, not just for what had been restored, but for what had been discovered along the way. The Phoenix Lady had indeed risen from the ashes, but she hadn't simply returned to her former self. She had emerged stronger, more vibrant, more authentically herself than ever before. Sometimes, I reflected, smiling through my tears, the most powerful call you can make isn't to a lawyer after all. It's to yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.